What? Okay. Do I get extra money for doing this advert? These earphone things aren't very good, you know. You should turn them up. No, not that bloody loud. God, what do you think I am? Anyway. Right, moving on. The writers of this podcast also produce books of their own. They are very good. Who said that? Oh, okay. So that's true, is it? They're very good writers of books. Right, well, what happened to this podcast then? Sorry? Oh. Anyway, you can go to the description to get their books from book places. I don't know what Amazon is. Okay. Amazon's a vain fun. No. Okay. Right. Enjoy the episode. Tally-ho!
The Professor. The battlefield had settled into that peculiar hour of war where everything stops feeling dramatic and starts feeling like poor life choices repeated at scale. About an hour in, you stop being heroic. You start being available. The kittens of doom were still at it, which is quite something when you consider their size. One expects a certain decline in morale, or at least an interest in sustained homicide. Not these. These were relentless, tiny, furious, and apparently fueled by whatever fundamental error had allowed them into existence in the first place. They moved and consumed everything. Monsters, demons, things with too many joints and opinions about mortality. All of it reduced to frantic, confused retreat under an avalanche of fur and enthusiasm. The ground had become something else entirely. Not earth, not battlefield. More a kind of theological slurry. Mud, blood, and the unfortunate remnants of things that had once been very confident about their own invincibility. Fools. Well, they won't be making that mistake again. I was standing in it up to my waist, which, academically speaking, felt like a strong argument for never standing anywhere ever again. My sword hung in my hand, or rather, it suggested hanging. Chipped, battered, offended by its own condition. My shield was no better. It had the air of something that had tried its best and was now simply considering retirement. And I, regrettably, was much the same. There is a particular difficulty in melee combat that no one ever explains properly in books or lectures. It's not the killing. Killing is straightforward enough once you've committed to it. The difficulty is in the uncertainty. With a shield wall, the things you're fighting should be on the other side of said wall of shields. Makes the enemy easy to find and identify. With open melee, you've no wall of shields to bisect you and your enemy. You have no idea where the next opponent or opponents are coming from. Not knowing where the next thing trying to kill you or to be killed is coming from is very much harder to deal with. Not knowing even if there is a next thing coming is possibly the most difficult thing of all. And not knowing whether you are currently winning, losing, or simply participating in an extremely violent misunderstanding is just so difficult. Everything is close. Too close. And then too far. Then suddenly they're inside your personal space, making poor decisions for you with blades. I adjusted my stance. What remained of it? There is a point where the stances of sword work fail because you're too I apologize, dear listener, but at this point the use of the laziest word would be a better describer than all else. Stances fail because you're too fucked. My swordmaster would have called this stance something like utterly fucking knackered stance 3. In this sudden, unpeaceful moment of not fighting, I tried to breathe and recover as I watched the chaos still unfolding before me. I saw the vampire woman standing on the back of some downed giant thing, her arcing swords cutting swathes through the waves of ever oncoming kittens. For her, it had to be only a matter of time before she fell. To her left, I could see the Balakalavian. He was hard to miss, really. You don't often overlook something that looks like a theological siege engine built around the idea of anger. Except now, he was struggling, which was new. But you see, the kittens had found him. Of course they had. They clung to him, little bodies swarming over impossible muscle and ancient brutality. He was no longer fighting so much as attempting to remove history from himself by hand. His weapons were gone. A lot of his flesh was gone. His enormous hands swept across his torso, trying to strip the kittens away in frantic motions. But it wasn't helping. Every kitten removed was relocated and replaced by another. It appeared as though he was dissolving as tiny lumps were taken from him, piece by piece. His arms now, then his shoulders, then his giant chest again, like some sort of recursive punishment. And I watched with a sort of revolted but exhausted academic fascination as the tiny creatures carried on with what they do best. They bit. They tore. Not quickly, not cleanly, but patiently and painfully, like teeny tiny scholars of degradation. Even from here, I could see the flesh going in strips. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just inevitable and agonizing. Blood formed in a misty pink cloud around the flailing giant. The Balakalavian was screaming in both pain and frustration, which was rather nice. I mean, I know that was cruel of me, but fuck him. Yes, it is quite difficult to watch something being flensed by kittens. Really is. But, I coped. Barely, whilst enjoying every second of it. One develops a certain professionalism in these matters, of course. I exhaled, somewhere between a sigh and a surrender, and I sniffed the air. Right, I muttered to nobody in particular. This is getting somewhat out of hand, isn't it? Coincidentally, at this point I watched the giant finally raise an arm that had been stripped to white visible bone. Crikey, that looks rather sore, I again told the no one who wasn't listening. Oh, how that monster screamed. It was... Well, to be honest, it was nice to hear, because when it finally stopped, it would mean that he wouldn't be an issue for me to deal with anymore. I nodded my head in satisfied horror once he was silenced. A toast, I told the air, which rudely did not offer a reply, as I reached into my satchel and retrieved my much-loved hip flask. There's always a moment in prolonged engagement where one must reassess one's priorities. Hydration, morale, and the philosophical question of why one is here at all. And maybe, why one is still alive. I took a drink. In this case, a fine blend was more appropriate than a malt for the old palate in a battle. I think this was the Nokdu blend that rinsed the mud from my mouth and throat. So smooth. A perfect, peaty palate-cleansing swallow. War is rough enough, and this did its job of soothing me. I lifted the pewter hip flask that had been in my life since the Indian Sepoy Mutiny in 1857. It was a little dinged and tarnished as a container, but it held its contents well enough. Contents which were warming, comforting, and entirely inappropriate for the circumstances, which is precisely what made it correct. I allowed myself a second sip, then a third. Well, more of a glug if I'm honest, because the universe was clearly not consulting me on operational decisions anymore. I said, quietly, as if making notes. A high-pitched scream very close that turned into a gurgle brought me back from the whiskey-filled moment. It was as though I'd stepped away and forgotten what was happening around me, even only for a short while. Right you are. This shit is still happening then. I again addressed the no one who was definitely not interested in conversating with me. A polite cough came from behind me. "Oh, fuck," I said. Then another polite cough came. My head nodded forward, and a smile creased the now drying crust of blood and guts and gore that grittily covered the skin of my face. I let go of a little laugh, raising my head again before addressing the cough that would not be linked to anything good. I could just tell. So, I prepared myself. Another cough. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, it was sort of courteous. The sort of sound that implies manners have been observed even while interrupting your imminent death. I winced, of course, because of course there actually was something behind me. There's always something bad behind you in situations like this. It's one of the few fundamental constants left in existence. Well, I didn't turn immediately. That would have implied eagerness to see my fate. Instead, I raised a hand slightly as though to acknowledge both the presence and my mild disappointment in it. "One moment," I said, taking another careful swallow from the flask. "If you don't mind." Whatever it was, it could apparently wait. Well, that was good, because so could I. Eventually, I sighed, carefully screwed the lid closed, checking that it was tight. After all, it would have been a liberty to survive and have lost the contents to my satchel. And then I tucked the flask away, with great reluctance. Once the flask's stowage was safe and assured, I retrieved a kerchief from my back pocket. It had formerly been a handkerchief. Now it was more of a historical document. Mud and blood and, well, something I didn't want to identify in polite thought decorated it. I looked at the now soiled rag, considered its life choices, and then threw it into the dirt. Back of the hand it was then. I mean, that wasn't any cleaner really, but efficiency over elegance, what? I wiped my mouth, taking my time to do so. Finally I stood. And I turned. Now one expects certain things to be at eye level. A man, a weapon, A monster with theological grievance. What I didn't expect was a crutch. Yes, specifically a giant crutch in every sense of a giant crutch, which is never a good opening sentence for any encounter you intend to survive. I tilted my head back slowly, working my way up the structure in front of me. Which he was. A structure, I mean. A tiny leather thong, first covering that not-so-tiny... Yes, unnecessary. Deeply unsettling. I mean, God, the thighs on the thing. Then a humongous tattooed, covered torso. Then mountains of muscle were arranged into what could only be described as architecturally aggressive. And finally, the head. A big, bloody lion's head. Of course, a big, bloody lion's head. Because subtlety had long since left this battlefield and was presumably hiding somewhere in a different narrative entirely. It was one of the twin brothers. The Balakalavian or the Valkalavian stood above me like a walking declaration of administrative violence. I am King Jovoston. He started his big-headed introduction, but I waved him into silence before he could let rip with his entire self-identification. I know, old chap, I know. I know all of it. Can we just, assume introductions and get on with the task in hand? I was now leaning on my sword with both hands, using it as a third support, like some sort of a grisly tripod, I suppose. He glanced at his tree-sized club nearby. My eyes went to the big, tree-sized club nearby. It really was a very big club, the size of a tree, and it was quite close. Not currently in use, which I found oddly more concerning than if it had been. I exhaled slowly. Well, I said, mostly to myself. This is bloody inconvenient. I was already mentally preparing the necessary calculations. Angle, distance, likelihood of survival, the usual comforting nonsense. I even felt a flicker of confidence at this. Foolish in hindsight. Because that's when I saw her. Fucking Fairy Foxglove. Sorry about the language, but she's all of those words. And she was there, sitting on his left shoulder, demurely, legs crossed, like she'd always been there. Like she belonged there, all tiny and green and utterly pleased with herself. She looked at me. She waved, blew a kiss. I gave her a big, bright, bloody toothed smile. Yes, of course, I told the world. And in that moment, something in me, something small but essential, just gave up. Not dramatically. No speech, no heroic collapse. Just a quiet internal resignation, like a clerk closing a ledger and deciding not to open another one ever again. The Balakalavian shifted slightly. Foxglove smiled all the wider, and I heard myself say it before I could properly object. Ah, I muttered. A pause. And then, with the weary certainty of a man recognizing an overdue appointment with fate itself, well, it seems I'm going to die. Properly. for the first and last time.
In Commander Montgomery Fortescue III. The little Bristol F.2 Fighter roared like an enraged cathedral organ held up together by failing canvas, failing prayer, and several failing engineering decisions that in hindsight should probably have involved more sobriety. I could feel every vibration of the machine through the control column, every shudder, every complaint. The old girl was already working beyond the physics she could cope with. She was breaking, but not broken, not yet. But she was beginning to object strongly to the request I was asking her, which frankly was, well, it was fair, but bit lively today, I shouted over the engine noise. Behind me Look cackled like a woman who had mistaken warfare for an especially energetic garden party. She stood in her seat now, somehow not falling to her death. Lucky that, eh, what? Her Lewis gun swooped back and forth, hammering in furious bursts, and somehow the gun never ran dry of ammunition. Never overheated neither, or all jammed as it should. They always bloody jammed after a while. A river of brass casings fell from the weapon. They literally poured from the plane. Every now and then one would come spinning past my shoulders. Yeah. All those burning bullets that she released from the gun went skyward, stitching lines across the monstrous airships. Somewhere above us, one of the living Zeppelins screamed, yes, 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 yes. I understand that sentence may require clarification, what? I shall not provide any, though, because, as you can tell, I'm a little bloody busy at the moment. Just accept that the Zeppelin was screaming. Some things simply arrive in one's life fully formed and, well, screaming. And in this case, the screaming thing was bloody enormous. A great swollen horror drifting through the clouds like God himself, as if he'd suffered a nervous breakdown and started breeding whales with thunderstorms coming out of their asses. Its skin pulsed. Not fabric, never fabric. Wet, veined, occasionally blinking, which I deeply resented. Zeppelins shouldn't blink, especially not with all those eyes. What? It violates the social contract that should have been, well, non-negotiable.
Got the bastard.
Look cried. I glanced upward just in time to see one of the great monstrosities erupt in purple flames. The Lewis rounds had torn through some vulnerable internal organ or gas bladder, or perhaps the very concept of buoyancy itself. The creature convulsed. Lightning and stinking offal burst from the holes created in its side. Blood and gore rained from the sky. God forbid anyone being beneath that waterfall of, well, foulness. And then it began to fall, the Zeppelin that is, good lord. Size of it. It came apart awfully slowly as it descended, burning flesh peeling away in gigantic flaming ribbons while ropes and dangling gondolas whipped through the clouds behind it. It was dying, never alive, but it was dying, but it was going to fight that death as it did. Below, the battlefield vanished beneath its shadow, then, impact. Dear good God, goodness me. The impact was brutal. Even the sky shook in response to it. Mud flew. Fire reached out from it into the sky, lighting the darkness and blinding me for a moment. Even from thousands of feet above, I felt it through the aircraft. A bloom of shattered earth erupted around our little fighter. Look whooped victoriously.
Woohoo! That's one down.
Bravo, my dear! I shouted in exultation. Which was a spur for the world to attempt to murder us again. The remaining Zeppelin moved with horrifying speed. The thing's tentacle-like ropes lashed through the sky like striking serpents. I railed hard to port. The little plucky plane responded. It was a little too slow. One of the ropes wrapped around the tail of the Bristol with a sickening jerk. The aircraft screamed. Not metaphorically. I mean, the actual wooden frame emitted a shriek of tortured stress that sounded remarkably human. Oh, bollocks, I muttered. The Zeppelin pulled, and suddenly we were no longer flying. We were being claimed, dragged up through the clouds, tail first towards an opening moor at the front of the airship. Ah, well, this is not good, I let slip.
British understatement at its best.
Shouted Luck and then laughed. She was my co-pilot in the oncoming crash of sorts. The controls of my car, each well they fought and struggled against the constricting restraints that held it tight. The Bristol bucked and rattled violently. Canvas tore somewhere behind me. The altimeter spun with deeply concerning enthusiasm. The little plane and I had managed to somehow reverse the direction we were being drawn. Aha! I yelled into the night.
Take that, you blighter.
Luck's machine gun stopped its rattle and was replaced by a manic laugh as a hand from behind me came and pointed in the new direction that I fought hard to take. Oh, well, that's not cricket, what? I told the hand's owner. She had drawn my eyes to... it was the ground. The ground now was there. The mud rushed up to meet us, not giving us a comfortable landing if we... Well, it wasn't landing, we just hit it. Closer, closer... I remember thinking with surprising calmness that this was probably it. No dramatic final charge, no glorious sunset, no poetic last words, just an exhausted RAF officer and his luck about to become an unusually patriotic crater. Funny thing, acceptance. People think it arrives nobly. It does not. It arrives like paperwork. A quiet internal voice saying, well, that appears to be that. I tightened my grip on the controls. Sorry, old things, I whispered to the Bristol and the lady as I girded my loins in preparation for a sudden stop. And then, red. A crimson blur tore through the clouds above us. The triplane descended like divine vengeance with absolutely no respect for international boundaries. Twin Spandau guns opened fire. The sound was unmistakable, short, sharp, violently German. The Red Baron, of course it was the bloody Red Baron. The Fokker triplane slashed across the Zeppelin's side in a burst of fire and traces. The creature reeled, actually reeled. The living airship shrieked in pain as black fluid exploded from its side. The tentacle holding us convulsed, then let go. The Bristol dropped freely for one terrible moment before I hauled back on the stick with everything I had left in me, eyes closed and swearing with quiet deference. The aircraft groaned, shifted, and shuddered. Wires went ping! Wooden stanchions cracked. The engine sputtered for a moment, then restarted from the sheer willpower I exerted on it. Come on! Come on, oh girl! The pointing finger of the woman behind me had not had time to be withdrawn within the period that this all happened in. The hand that was there now changed from a finger point to fingers crossed gesture. I mean, when the very embodiments of luck crosses the fingers, then we can accept that things are somewhat bad. What? I started grinning, leaned back as though that would help the plane level out, and closed my eyes. Luck was laughing. She was enjoying herself. The plane struck, it shook, and I heard screeching and crunching as the plane shuddered and rocked. This was it! And time was slowing so we could experience every single painful detail of our... crash. And then... nothing. I could still hear the engine. I could still sense the air whipping past my face. I opened my eyes, but we were still in the air, barely flying, about 3 down feet above the churned airfield. What had been that crashing sound? An ear flap of my flying hat was lifted, and a warm kiss was placed upon my cheek. A feminine, grateful laugh, and then...
You seem to have left your undercarriage in the mud, what?
was said. I laughed, not because it was funny, because the alternative was, bloody screaming.
We're still alive.
Luck bellowed. Yes, madam, we are, but I am afraid only somewhat temporarily, I shouted back. Above us, the Baron banked elegantly and came around for another attack. But he's a magnificent bloody pilot one. The rather arrogant bastard waved and released a pearly smile that I could see even through, though there were 500 yards between us. With that arrogance, I adored him immediately. The Zeppelin itself somehow recovered and surged towards him, lightning crackling across his bloated flesh. Right then, I growled. Round two, tally-ho. I pulled the Bristol upward. The engine howled. Mud and fire vanished beneath us as we climbed directly towards the monster. Luck opened fire first. The Lewis gun chattered furiously. The Baron swept across from starboard simultaneously, his red triplane cutting through the smoke like an executioner's blade. We struck together. The Zeppelin burst apart, not exploded, burst like an overripe corpse kicked down a staircase by an angry god. Not a description from my imagination there. I actually seen an angry god kick a corpse down the stairs once in Peru. Not very pleasant. Anyway, back to the battle. Fire blossomed through the Zeppelin's body. Lightning erupted wildly into the clouds. Chunks of burning flesh and metal rained downward in every direction. The shock wave rocked both our aircraft, and then suddenly, silence. Well, relative silence. Just engines now. The storm somewhat dissipated. The sun woke up and arrived. The Baron flew alongside us, close enough for me to see him clearly in his cockpit. He was calm, perfectly composed, as though we had merely concluded a sort of pleasant tennis match. He raised one gloved fist in salute for a job done, and his gratitude at the destruction of the monstrous blimp. I returned the salute instantly. Luck waved both arms like an escaped lunatic, jumping up and down in, well, I have to say, an extremely un-British manner. I mean, I could forgive her in her excitement. That's what a gentleman does in these cases. The Baron, actually, I could see he was laughing. I could see it even through the dirt and other things smeared across one's goggles. Then he pointed towards me and then himself. A challenge. I nodded and gave him a salute that would have made the old parade ground sergeant cry with pride. Ah, of course, naturally. Now we were two apex predators that had survived. Two apex predators that could not live in the same sky without testing ourselves against one another. Oh, now the real game begins, I said to my little wreck of an aircraft, giving her a gentle pat. And I smiled despite myself. Look, I said quietly.
Yes?
She replied. All of a sudden she was, I don't know, radiant and beautiful again, not a smear of mud or blood on her flying kit. Her long auburn hair was now dry and fluttering like a flag in the aircraft's draft. I believe the Baron wishes to murder us somewhat politely, I said with an inner joy.
Oh, good.
She replied. I was worried things were going to get dull. You do not get this type of filly these days, what? The red triplane peeled away sharply. I turned to her. May I ask a boon of you, my dear? I yelled to be heard. She nodded. Could I request that you stay out of this conflict of ours, old bean? She looked deep into my eyes for a moment. It fair made a man question himself, that look. Then she gave me a thumbs up as if from a Roman emperor of old, and nodded, adding a smile many men would have died for, and that many men had actually died for. I laughed. I laughed with the sheer joy of what was about to happen and rolled after my gallant opponent immediately. The Bristol lunged into pursuit, and somewhere deep inside me, beneath the terror, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the absolute certainty that this was all completely insane, I felt it. Joy. Pure. Terrible. An aviator's joy. The sky opened around us like a battlefield built for the gods. And we went to bloody war.